丈太郎くん。
So, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Wow. Where to even begin? You could say the show is strange, odd, bizarre even. The basic premise is this. The Joestar family, this is harder than I thought it would be. Okay, the Joestar family. The story follows the Joestar family through the generations, starting with Jonathan Joestar in Victorian England. The family is incredibly strong. Each highlighted descendant has a special ability, either called Amon, which is a sort of life energy thing, or a stand, which is a being created from that life energy that fights for the stand user. Whether we're talking about Amon or a stand depends on the season. The part. They're called parts in JoJo. So far, there have been 5 animated seasons and 8 different parts of the manga. The animated seasons include Part 1, Phantom Blood. Jonathan Joestar is our JoJo, and Dio Brando is introduced as our main antagonist. Amon is also introduced. Part 2, Battle Tendency. Joseph Joestar, the grandson of Jonathan, is our JoJo, and the Pillar Men are our main antagonists. Part 2 starts off in World War II era America. Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. Joseph's grandson, Jotaro Kujo, is our JoJo, and Dio is once again returning as our big bad of the season. Dio's a vampire. I didn't mention that before. Also, stands are introduced. Part 3 takes place in the 1980s in Japan. Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. In this one, the family line gets a little bit confusing. Our JoJo is Joseph's illegitimate son, Josuke. Serial killer Yoshikage Kira is our big bad of the season. This season takes place in the early 2000s in Japan and is the first season of the show to feature 3 generations of Joestar: Joseph, Jotaro, and Josuke. And then finally, we have Part 5, Golden Wind, with... Okay, this one's a little bit confusing. But basically our JoJo is Giorno Giovanni, and he is the son of Dio Brando's head on Jonathan Joestar's body. Like I said, Dio is a vampire, or was a vampire. You know what? Whatever. The big bad is the mob boss, Diavolo, and this one takes place in Italy. In the mid-2000s. Okay, got it? No? Well, then I don't know what to tell you. Go read the wiki. That's where I got most of this anyway. Now, let's talk about how this all started. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure was originally serialized in Shonen Jump from 1987 to 2004, and written, drawn, developed, basically everything by real-life vampire Hirohiko Araki. Publication was transferred to a new magazine, Ultra Jump, in 2005, where it continues publication to this day. The manga did have a brief anime adaptation from 1993 to 2002, which only focused on Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, before being rebooted as a full adaptation of the entire manga in 2012. 12. Which is the adaptation set to continue in December 2021 with Part 6 Stone Ocean. The manga and anime has garnered this intense cult following, mostly because of its ridiculous action, quirky aesthetics, and unique art style. Speaking of which, the art style in JJBA is one of its most defining qualities. The characters have crazy, over-exaggerated features, and a fashion sense that could be described as camp, maybe? There seem to be 3 types of characters in JoJo. Greek gods, literally, classical Greek sculptures are one of Araki's references of choice. Little guys, and women. The Greek god type is huge with bulging muscles and broad shoulders. The little guy type is just that. Just some funky little guys. And women are women, not super diverse. There is a sub-genre of character that starts showing up more after Stardust Crusaders that I like to call skinny legends. These are your Rohans and your Brunos. Basically what I'm saying is the characters all look ridiculous, the colors are bright, and the fashion is iconic, which makes the cultural proliferation of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure all the more interesting. Have you ever seen this? Or this? I hate to be the one to tell you this, but that's a JoJo reference. In fact, if you ask any hardcore JoJo fan, JoJo references are almost everywhere. And the thing is, they're kinda right. JoJo seems to have left its fingerprints on everything, especially Japanese media. The franchise itself has become a meme, not only in the modern internet sense, but in the traditional cultural sense. Proliferating books, shows, movies, music, schools of thought, probably religions, TBH. But what does it have to do with masculinity? Now, I'd like to ask kind of a loaded question. What is masculinity? The answer obviously is that there isn't really a standard answer. The concept of masculinity is, at the end of the day, a social construct, and varies from culture to culture. In the Western world, masculine traits are usually things like strength, courage, leadership, assertiveness, etc. Think cowboys, think CEOs. You get the idea. Again, I feel the need to reiterate, these are social constructs. Anyone could be a strong, courageous cowboy. The Western ideal of masculinity is very similar to the ideals found in JoJo's birthplace, Japan. But the difference comes with the focus. Western masculinity tends to focus on who a man is and what he's accomplished. But when a recent survey asked Japanese men in their 40s what it means to be masculine, their responses focused more on what men can do for others. Commitment and responsibility versus leadership and assertiveness. Obviously, these Western and Eastern concepts have a lot of overlap. But the distinction is important to keep in mind when discussing an anime like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And for the 3rd time, just to really drive the point home, say it with me, kids. All of this is a social construct. JoJo is obviously an incredibly masculine show in the traditional sense. The majority of our protagonists are these big, muscly dudes with huge shoulders. They're literally Greek gods. The fight scenes are very violent and bombastic with lots of punching and blood and guts. And the male characters are often tasked with taking care of the female characters. Like 15-year-old Josuke. 15-year-old Josuke, carrying the responsibility of having to protect his mother, and the gang in part 5 being tasked with protecting and escorting Trish. Now, on its own, this masculinity is not necessarily a bad thing. Masculinity on its own is obviously not inherently a bad thing. You can be very masculine and caring, hardworking, a provider. Both traditional masculinity and femininity have their benefits. So what do people mean when they refer to toxic masculinity? No matter what some people might try to tell you, most people aren't referring to masculinity as a whole when they use the term. So what are they referring to? It wouldn't be an Ellen video without a Wikipedia definition. Nothing but pure professionalism here. Toxic masculinity. The concept of toxic masculinity is used in academic and media discussions of masculinity to refer to certain cultural norms that are associated with harm to society and men themselves. Traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia, can be considered toxic, due in part to their promotion of violence. It's basically when things get controlling, macho to the extreme, emotionally inept, and overtly violent for the sake of some sort of man points. Now, this kind of toxic masculinity can sometimes be found in the protagonists of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but it's especially found in our villains. Look at Dio, Kira, and Diavolo. All of these men are deeply obsessed with control and have this possessiveness about them and this need to be in charge of the narrative. Compared to our protagonists, who, for the most part, care for others and only really resort to violence when they are protecting somebody or providing for somebody or self-preservation, you know, basic hero stuff. And only occasionally dip into toxic masculine traits. Looking at you, Joseph. The masculinity on display in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure really challenges convention in a lot of interesting ways. So let's talk about that. So first, let's talk about the outfits. The outfits in JoJo they're colorful and flamboyant, and sometimes veer into the physically impossible. From the very beginning, these hyper-masculine characters are wearing clothing that would not be defined as hyper-masculine. And aside from the outfits themselves, these guys cannot stop fashion posing. In fact, our main antagonist for 2 of the 5 parts, Dio, his iconic poses, like this and all that, are directly inspired by fashion posing, specifically by American fashion artist Tony Cervantes. So you have Araki pulling references from Greek statues and fashion poses, which kind of mixed together makes for this really interesting look at masculinity. These characters are confident enough in their masculinity to wear these outfits and strike these poses. And these characters exhibit this pure manly physical strength, but also this emotional maturity. None of them are ashamed to cry or hug their friends. And this is all there from part 1, Phantom Blood. And no one cries more than a Joestar, and no one is physically stronger than a Joestar. The characters dance and sing and wear crop tops. And then starting in part 5, you start to really see a change in the art style. You start to see these big muscles and broad shoulders kind of fall to the wayside. But the characters still maintain that core masculinity. They're leaders, they're courageous, they're committed and responsible. In fact, the core gang in part 5 is a perfect example of how JoJo characters aren't ashamed to show that brotherly love, to show outward affection towards their male friends. These guys also dance.
Coming from my mind.
Because they're so confident in that masculinity. In part 5, the female characters also start to take on a more active role, while still ultimately being protected by the male characters. But you take what you can get. We're not perfect, okay? The JoJo is definitely not perfect. You can talk about the... So you have this franchise that's super popular and super masculine. No one can argue that. But also challenges a lot of the conventions of traditional masculinity. And I feel like I should address something here. When things get hyper masculine and there's a lot of brotherly love going on, not a lot of female characters that are super active, things tend to horseshoe and become a little, you know. And a lot of people interpret a lot of JoJo characters in that way. And I'm not here to take that from them. If that is your interpretation, then sure, I'm not gonna disagree. Because at the end of the day, that is also masculine. And say it with me, masculinity is a social construct. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, while being bizarre, is a really interesting look at masculinity and its surrounding concepts. It really challenges what traditional masculinity could and should look like. One of the toughest characters is obsessed with studying fish and has little dolphin pins. And I think that's really cool, even if it's unintentional. I will say, if after watching this video you decide to look into JoJo, like I said, there are quite a few problematic elements that were not touched upon here. So just be warned about that. Also, it is weird. When they say bizarre, they mean bizarre. It took me years and years and years and years to actually get into it because it was a lot. But yeah, if you're interested at looking at traditional masculinity from kind of a different angle, go for it, man. Don't be afraid to tap into your inner JoStar. Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. This one I'm pretty happy with, actually. If you liked the video, why not give it a thumbs up or subscribe to see more? You can share it around, spread the JoJo love. And if you want to support the channel, links to my Patreon and merch are in the link tree in the description. Patrons get all kinds of fun perks like credit at the end of videos, the chance to vote on video topics, blooper reels, Discord access, just so much fun stuff, guys. If you didn't like the video, what do you mean you don't like it? It's kind of embarrassing. I bet you were expecting a blooper, but instead it was me, Dio.